Welcome to Transformative Principal, where I help you stop putting out fires and start leading. I'm your host, Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. All right. Well, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have Dr. Valerie Dombrech. I don't know. We'll go with it. She's been an educator for 27 years, including 15 years as a school principal and 22 years in providing teacher training and professional development. She recently completed her doctorate in leadership and innovation from Arizona State University. And she did her dissertation on the trust-based observation protocol, which if you've been listening to this podcast, you know about Craig Randall, who I've had on the program, and his excellent work around that. And so we're going to talk a little bit about this. And I'm going to be honest, I'm using this as a session to help me in my dissertation process. So many of you know that I'm working on my doctorate right now. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. So Valerie has graciously agreed, having just finished hers recently and gone through that torment, to give me some ideas and thoughts. And so we're going to talk a lot about Craig's stuff, but we're also going to apply it to me, and I'm going to use this selfishly. So Valerie, welcome to Transformative Principal. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jethro. I'm really excited to be here.
All right. Well, one of the things that I love about doing this podcast is that I get to talk to people who are super smart, but that maybe people don't actually know about. And you might be one of those people. You're doing good work in the Apache Reservation in Arizona, and it's awesome that you're doing that, but that probably does not get you a lot of national and out there exposure. So why don't we start by you telling me a little bit about your work on the reservation, where you started your career and where you're at now.
Yeah, so I started as a third grade teacher in January 1998. It was my first teaching job, and I moved from my small town, a different town in Arizona, to White River, Arizona, on the White Mountain Apache Reservation. And I taught as a third grade teacher for 6.5 years. And I was really privileged to have a lot of amazing professional development and supportive administrators, supervisors. And so I was able to, in addition to getting my master's degree from Northern Arizona University, I was able to move up in the district. So I was a district school improvement specialist and an assistant principal. And then I got to return to my school, where I had originally been a teacher, as its principal. And I total time in White River was, at that time, was 13.5 years. Then I went elsewhere for 10 years, and I've been back for the past 4 years.
Yeah, very cool. And I really appreciate when people are committed to a community like you obviously are. And I think that's really powerful. So tell us, I know this is going to be tough because you wrote like 190 pages on this topic, but give us a brief overview of what your dissertation was about and what you were going for.
Yeah, just to correct you, it is almost 300 pages, but
yeah,
I guess that's with the, well, yeah, that's with all the addendum, the appendices. Yeah, that's what they're called. You'll soon find out.
Yeah. According to mine, it's 298 in my PDF reading.
Yes, that is correct.
I'll go with 300 even. Close enough.
Yeah, I said almost. So
yeah.
So the process, first of all, with my program with Arizona State University, it's the EDD and Leadership and Innovation program, and it's a 3.5-year cohort where practitioners we implement action research in our own settings. I actually did not do my research in my current district, in a different district, but the idea is actually engaging in an intervention to solve a problem of practice. So it is not just putting together a survey, and maybe you have hundreds of people that answer your survey, which is great, and will certainly learn a lot about whatever that problem may be or whatever that research may be, and be able to impact practice. But the great thing about action research is it really does impact practice, because you're actually doing it within the setting and you're part of that setting. So the program was really great because it built up to the final dissertation cycle, because even in the second year, we already started doing action research cycles. I did 2 cycles of action research with this district before I was in the final year, which is the third year, but it really, with the timing, it comes out to 3.5. And as long as you stick with your cohort, you do it in that time, Yeah. So I did manage to do that. It was amazing. And it was great because the cohort that I was involved with, we really got to know each other. It was online, virtually, a lot with Zooms and so on, but we really got to know each other, and really help each other. So that process, it was 2 cycles of action research before that final cycle. And so all our courses along the way built up to that, and that we even had to write a draft, a very mini version draft of the dissertation for our first cycle, treating the first cycle like it was a dissertation. Yeah. Obviously, it was a very small version. And so just developing on that and continuing to read literature and to implement those cycles and making changes from how the intervention went, just like in teaching, because really teachers, they do action research all the time. Maybe they don't think of it that way, or maybe they don't do it formally, but they do. They try something with their students, they measure that in some way, and then they look at that and see, hey, what could I do differently? What could I do better? And that's really how the action research dissertation worked as well.
Yeah. So did you have experience with Craig's trust-based observations protocol before?
I didn't. I wish I had. But I read his book in early 2021, just pretty soon after it was published. Yeah. And we were in the middle of that fun COVID stuff. So I really couldn't, and I was still a principal then, so it really wasn't something that was reasonable for me to try with my own teachers at that time. We were just surviving. Obviously, we were doing everything the best we could for our students, and we did. We all made it through, but it wasn't something I could really try. So, so I, pretty soon after reading that book, I applied for the program with ASU, and in our application, even in the narrative, you don't have to stick with this. It could change. It changed for a lot of my cohort members, but you kind of have to have an idea of what you think your problem of practice is and what might be an intervention for it. And I was already thinking about TBO, but it was just based on reading his book. I did have the privilege of meeting him virtually 2 years later, and then I did get to meet him in person last year. And so we've been in touch, but to actually have had his training, I wish it could have been that way, but it didn't work that way. So it was entirely based on his book.
Okay, so that's really interesting too, because you're doing a dissertation on involving his process, and yet you haven't been through his actual training. You've just read his book. I think that's really a valuable thing, because a lot of times as educators, we feel like we have to attend the training and get certified, as it were. And that's not necessarily the case. And especially when there's a good book written, like Craig's book is, then it's valuable to know that you can just do stuff, you can just take what you learn and apply what you learned, and it actually works.
Yeah, I do highly recommend contacting him about his training. I think that is the best possible way, but there's something to be said for, like what you're saying, a book study. We can do that anytime. We can take any book with rich information and use it with teachers, with with administrators, and try to put into practice what that book has, because we don't all have the possibilities of having a certain training, like you said, or that we have to have it. And I think Craig, I won't speak for him, but I believe he also sees his book in that way, that anybody could read his book and try this, and try TBO. So that's what I did, and I created. For my first 2 cycles of research, I worked with one principal and then with 2 principals and a group of teachers. And in both of those, I gave a 1-day workshops, and it was based on his book. And then I followed up with them, met with them virtually. And then with my dissertation research, I had the whole group of principals and the superintendent from this district. One principal did the study with me, but in the training, all of them were involved. And I made that one 3 days and tried to make it more in depth, but it was entirely based on Craig's book. But also my literature review, all the literature that I read and researched, and it's quite extensive. So that's one of your biggest things with your dissertation. But based on that, I showed how his the TBO approach to formative supervision, as opposed to teacher summative evaluation, how that is supported in the literature regarding formative supervision or instructional supervision, but also in building trusting relationships in schools. And I based my workshop also on that information. So showing the value behind the TBO approach.
Yeah, that's really good. You have 4 research questions, and I'm going to read through those.
Okay.
I'm striving really hard to just come with one research question, because I feel like that will be easier to answer 1 than 4. So before I read the questions, will you tell me why you chose? Well, maybe I'll read the questions first, then you tell me why you chose 4 instead of just 1, or how you came about that process.
Sure.
So first question is, how do administrators and teachers describe their experiences with formative supervision? Number 2 is, how do administrators and teachers participating in a formative supervision intervention perceive its effects on teachers' professional growth? Number 3, how do administrators and teachers participating in a formative supervision intervention perceive its effects on trusting administrator-teacher relationships? And number 4, how do administrators use formative supervision to build trusting administrator-teacher relationships with respect to the facets of trust, including A, benevolence, B, reliability, C, competence, D, honesty, and E, openness? All right, that sounds like a lot to unpack there. So first, why didn't you just one of those to focus on?
Because all aspects were important. So the first one is very specifically focused on qualitative research. And especially that I was not on campus with the principal and teachers as they implemented formative supervision, and in this case, the TBO approach. So the only way I was really going to be able to perceive their perceptions and really understand where they might be coming from, instead of projecting my own ideas about what this means and what it's like, is for them telling me their experiences. And my questions, my interview questions, were very open-ended. So it was based on what they ended up saying. And I would certainly follow up to their questions, and then it became a natural conversation, actually much like a reflective conversation in TBO. So that was the only way to really, truly understand what was the impact or what their experience was like of using this formative supervision approach. The other interesting thing with that is I used formative interviews. So it wasn't just like an interview at the end. I interviewed them several times along the way. So as they were implementing the intervention, to see how that was going, and my additional or my following interviews were somewhat based on the previous interviews after I analyzed the data from their interviews. So that one was really important to have that overall experience. Then the next 2 questions were both quantitative and qualitative, and it was focused on how formative supervision impacts the principals and teachers in two specific two specific areas. And so one of them is how do they perceive it's affecting the teacher's professional growth? And the other is how do they perceive it's affecting their trusting administrator-teacher relationships? So both of those were essential because both of those I had found as important in the literature and as part of the TBO approach. And also regarding my problem of practice of teacher evaluation systems not having much of an impact on teachers' professional growth, or actually diminishing the trust between administrators and teachers. So both of those were important to have. It's not like I could have one without the other. And then I had the fourth one, which you might think, well, you've already asked about trust. You don't need the fourth one. But the fourth one was both was actually qualitative and quantitative because I wanted to look specifically at what the administrator did to build trusting relationships, not just how she perceives it or how her teachers perceive it, if it is building trust, but what does she actually do? And in my review of the literature, I discovered Shannon and Hoy, their facets of trust, which are benevolence, reliability, competence, honesty, and openness. And those are ways that trust is built. So, if you're honest with your, so between supervisors and teachers, trust is going to be built. That's just a simple way to describe it. But I actually use those as both quantitative constructs in my surveys and as qualitative categories to group my data from the interviews, from the things that the teachers and the administrator said.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's definitely interesting. And all right. So moving on, because this is where I think the real fascinating piece is. You have towards the end, you have some recommendations and
Yes.
and conclusions that people should draw. And I'm not going to read through all of these here, but there were a couple of things that really stood out to me, which I thought was just fantastic. And these are things that Craig and I have talked about as well, that a lot of these frameworks and things that we adopt are actually hindrances to building trust and making people feel comfortable and enjoy their whole teaching process. So you have a few suggestions. I'm just going to highlight a couple. You don't need to have pre and post observations anymore unless teachers and principals say that those are really vital. You don't need to use the Danielson framework, for example, anymore, unless you feel like that's what people really need to have. And then you don't need to have documented lesson plans and things like that. But you should continue goal setting, and you should continue having these reflective conversations. And ideally, the TBO approach specifically, since that's what you used. And so this overall recommendation is the one that I will read. You say, last, I have an overall recommendation for my participating district and other Arizona districts. Instead of using evaluation as the medium to support teachers' professional growth, use formative supervision, ideally the trust-based observations approach, with consistent cycles of informal observations followed by reflective conversations guided by non-directive, collaborative, caring, honest, and open approaches to feedback focused on the teacher's perspective, reflections, and strengths. And what I love about that is that gets to the human element of teaching. What else would you add to that?
I think specifically the collaborative and non-directive approaches. I think it would be valuable for administrators to really look into those, what those involve. Obviously, it's all in my dissertation, which maybe is a lot to read. But I would recommend that they read let me find the exact title so they can consider it. I had it listed here. Okay, so I would recommend that they, in addition to, of course, Craig Randall's Trust-Based Observations, that they read Supervision and Instructional Leadership, A Developmental Approach by Glickman et al. And the edition I used in my dissertation was 2018. But there's newer ones. I believe maybe 2021 was the most recent. There could be a newer one. But this really, it's technically a textbook for an ed leadership course, but it really gets at the developmental supervision approach. And that's what Craig's TBO does, is the idea of focusing on the teacher's reflections, the teacher's perspective, and not just that you, the administrator, is the expert. The teacher is the expert. The teacher is the expert of his or her own classroom. And so it's really valuable what they think. And so that's why in the TBO intervention, a reflective conversation starts with a reflective question: is what were you doing to help the students learn? And it starts with the teacher bringing that up, not the administrator reading off their sheet or even saying, well, I'm going to do the feedback sandwich where I'm going to tell you something great and then tell you something you need to work on, and then follow it up with something great again. So you'll just feel really good about yourself. That's so inauthentic. Instead, if you ask the teacher this reflective question, it is very authentic because it is the teacher starting with that. And really the developmental supervision approaches of being non-directive and collaborative, that is exactly what it is. And there are times when you need to do a more directive approach, or there may be a certain situation, a certain teacher, a really new teacher perhaps, but even a directive approach doesn't have to be authoritative or threatening. But the idea with TBO and what I saw with developmental supervision is that you come to you keep in mind that any teacher, you could use the non-directive approach. That's what you start with. And then you see if something more or different is needed. So you give every teacher a benefit of the doubt that they don't need you to be directive.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think that's a good way to sum it up, that's really valuable and powerful for everybody involved. And it makes everybody feel better about the whole situation. I went to a district where teachers were required to turn in their lesson plans every week. And I thought it was the dumbest thing ever. I was like, there's no way I'm going to look at any of these lesson plans. And I didn't. And so then I was like, why do we turn these in? And everybody was like, because that's what we've always done. And I said, who's going to get me in trouble if we don't do this? And nobody could point to anybody. So I said, okay, we're not collecting these anymore. You don't have to turn these in. And the teaching did not go downhill at all. In fact, I think it went uphill because they weren't wasting time on these stupid lesson plans that I didn't need to see. And so I took a different approach, and that made things so much better. And in regards to the insult sandwich, which is what I call it, because we don't call things by the bread, we call them by the meat, right?
Oh my goodness. Yes.
You have a ham sandwich. You don't have a whole wheat sandwich, right? So saying a compliment sandwich is really disingenuous because we would never put the stuff in the middle. So anyway, so I call that an insult sandwich because that's really what it is. Or you can say a criticism sandwich, whatever. The thing is, those things don't work anyway, so don't use them. All right. Well, this has been really good. You've helped me understand some things and answered questions that I didn't even ask, but you answered through your conversation. So my last question, Valerie, is what is one thing that a principal can do this week to be a transformative leader like you?
Thank you. I would say, if they aren't already, start talking and meeting with their teachers. Build up to it if you have to. In that, there's those hallway conversations. Start the day by just stopping by a few rooms at a time, perhaps, and just asking how they're doing. and then trying to implement, and I do recommend Craig Randall's TBO approach, but implement formative supervision, seeing how they can start to get into classrooms for longer amounts of time, for 20 minutes, not just the 3 to 5 classroom walkthrough, typical walkthrough, and then using that to meet with teachers for reflective conversations. And I think they've got to look at how they use their time, which was a finding in my study and in my own experience. It is so hard. How do you find the time? But if they look at Craig Randall's TBO ideas, and also Justin Bader has ideas about managing time. I wish there was more out there. In my dissertation, I did note that I feel it would be great if there were more studies on this, on how there are studies on how principals use their time, but not studies on how they make the time or create the time. I guess you can't make the time, like I think Justin Bader said, but how that time happens, how you rearrange things, restructure things, do these different strategies so that you can have that time for the formative supervision, because it is the most valuable thing you can do as an instructional leader, as a transformative principal. It's the most important thing, because you building relationships with your teachers, you knowing what's happening in their classrooms, you knowing what their perspectives are on that, and them feeling comfortable and asking for your support and asking for your ideas, and having normal conversations between each other that are reflective and actually have an impact, that leads to the students succeeding in the classrooms. And that's what education is all about. So
absolutely. I appreciate that. And what I will add to that is, at the beginning of my principal career, I thought I needed to do observations all the time. So I was in teachers' classrooms constantly, and I spent a lot of time there. And then by the end, I realized that I didn't need to be in their classroom when students were in there. I needed to be in their classrooms talking with them and building trust and having reflective conversations, or I call them self-discovery conversations. And what was really powerful about that is that I didn't need to go do observations really that often, because I knew what was going on, because they were talking to me and telling me what was going on and sharing the wins and the losses and the failures and the successes. And that was really powerful. So this has been a great conversation, Valerie. Thank you so much for being part of Transformative Principal. And if anybody wants your dissertation, they can just reach out to you, right? Is that the best thing?
Yes, they can. Also, it's published through ProQuest, but maybe not everyone has direct access to ProQuest. If they look me up, if they type Valerie Dombreux dissertation, should be able to find it on academia.edu. I have shared it there. It's also on ResearchGate, so it's freely available for anyone to read.
Yeah, very good. Well, I will definitely put a link to your academia.edu page in the show notes here, so people can reach out that way as well. Thank you so much for being part of Transformative Principal.
Thank you so much, Jethro. It's been great.